Hey y'all, it's Brad Stulberg here. Thank you so much for picking up a copy of The Way of Excellence. I cannot wait for you to read the book. I'm also excited to get into this video. In part one, we're going to go through the idea and inspiration behind the book. You'll see when that idea first occurred and how it came to be. We'll also go into the process of actually writing the book itself. One of the questions I get most frequently asked is, how do you go from an idea to a finished product? And I'm going to walk you through that. In part two of this video, we're going to go deep into the book itself. You'll get a behind-the-scenes look at some of the reporting I did. I'll pull out my favorite findings from the studies and research, and I'll also highlight my favorite practical applications and tools that appear throughout the book. The goal of this video is to make reading, or for those of you that listening a more immersive experience. Let's dive in. Why excellence and why now? I believe that we are made to move toward excellence like a tree is made to move toward the sun. As you'll read in the book, it is deep in our biological inheritance. We evolved to find activities and projects that are worthwhile and to give those things our all, to create, to contribute, to make progress individually, and also to make progress societally. It's what we're here to do. Why now? Because we live in a time that can be characterized by mass distraction and mass alienation. Alienation being the philosophical term from remove or separation from our own lives. We're constantly pinged, pushed, pulled this way and that. Life can feel very frantic and frenetic. And what we know based on decades of research and millennia of history and all of the reporting that I did is that we feel our best and we do our best when we are intimately involved in pursuits that align with our values and goals, right? That is the ultimate way to live a good life, and that is the ultimate way to contribute to your community, to your organization, to society at large. So amidst the tumult and the craziness of life, my fear, my concern, my deep concern is that excellence as a personal and a cultural aspiration is being overlooked. Yet when we think about the things that move us most, a solo violin performance that brings us to tears, a moving piece of art, a transplant surgeon doing a 9-hour heart and lung transplant case, a researcher exploring deep space, literally stretching the horizons of what we know to be true, a leader leading an organization into an unknown future, taking his or her people along for the ride, right? These are the things that light us up. There's a reason that we find them inspirational. There's a reason that we're drawn to them in others, and there's a reason that we feel so good when we are pursuing our own versions of excellence. And I don't want that to get lost. And I'm scared that that's getting lost. And this book is a call to reclaim that. It's a call to reclaim it for yourself. It's a call to reclaim it for all of us. I feel it is the most important book that I could write right now and the most important book that we could read right now. I wanted to bring you out here to the Hominy Creek Greenway. It's about 5-10 minutes from my home. And the reason why I wanted to bring you out here is this is exactly where I was when I had the aha moment that became the book. Prior to this fateful walk, I'd been rereading the work of Robert Pirsig, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and Lila. And I'd also been reading this book called The Strange Order of Things by the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio. And all of these books were pointing toward what I've come to call excellence from very unique and interesting perspectives. I was also feeling kind of burnt out myself at this moment. The Practice of Groundedness had recently been published. Most of the work on Mastery of Change was essentially done. For those that haven't read my work, those are some prior books of mine. And I've been doing a lot of promotional and marketing work for those books, but I've been far away from the actual craft of writing and the deep thinking that often leads to these books. And I'd finally gotten back into this kind of reading and deep thinking when I was out on this walk. And so many other people that I'd been speaking with around this time, friends and colleagues, they reported something similar, that they too felt like they were a little bit distanced from the parts of their life, whether that was vocational life or personal life, or in some cases both, that really gave them the most fulfillment and allowed them to feel a strong sense of mastery, of mattering, of satisfaction. So those were the books that I was reading. Those were the conversations that I was having when I was on this walk. And my mind just lit up, and it essentially said that my philosophy of life personally has always been to aspire toward excellence. And by excellence, I mean involved engagement in worthwhile pursuits that align with my values and goals. When I share that definition with other people, they all say, yeah, like that is what we ought to be doing with our lives. Yet so many people were feeling removed from it. So I was right about here. I'm walking down this path, reading Pirsig, I'm reading Damasio, and I just have this idea that what Robert Pirsig is laying out philosophically, the science that Antonio Damasio is explaining, all of the psychology that I'm experiencing in my own mind, that I'm hearing from other people, all of this is pointing toward a strong, distinct need to reclaim excellence as a personal aspiration and as a cultural aspiration. We've gotten really far away from this orientation, from this philosophy toward life that not only makes us feel good, but also makes us contribute and create our best stuff. So I was right here and I picked up the phone and I called my literary agent, Lori, who oftentimes for a big call like this, she likes to have some structure, to have an email before, so she's prepped to have a call scheduled. And I just picked up the phone and I said, Lori, do you have a couple minutes? She said, yeah. I said, I'm rereading Pirsig. I'm reading this fascinating book by this other neuroscientist. I'm having all these conversations with people. And I think what people are missing and what we desperately need is excellence. And I think we need to redefine this term. I think we need to reclaim this term. And I'd like to try to take a big, comprehensive intellectual swing at what excellence is and why it matters, and then go back to the concrete tools that at least support someone on that path. And I've had calls like this with Lori before, and most of the time she says, that's an interesting idea. Let's work on it. Or how about you put some more thoughts in an email? Or how about you outline it? But in that moment on this path, Lori said, Brad, that's the next book that you should write. And here we are now, with an idea for a book. So let's go back to the office, and I'm actually going to walk you through the process of how that phone call and that idea turned into the book that y'all either have in front of you or are shortly going to have in front of you. All right, now we are going to get into the process of writing the book. And for me, that starts with reading. I read extensively, and whenever I'm reading nonfiction, I am underlining passages that I find especially resonant or that I think might inform an idea that I'm working on, or even just passages that really open my mind to a new concept. And then when I finish reading a nonfiction book, I'll go through the book, I'll flip through, and I'll just find the pages that have underlined passages on them. And then for each of the pages with an underlined passage, I will take a sticky note and I'll stick it on there upside down. So the sticky part is on the page, and then it is like a little tab off the page. And on that page, I'll write down a prompt that lets me know what I underlined. And very rarely am I writing word for word what I underlined, because often I'm underlining a whole paragraph. But it calls to my mind that, hey, this is the topic on this page. So here I wrote down Feelings Guide Evolution. And the underlined material on this page is going to speak to that topic. Here's another example of that. Here's a direct quote. Feelings tell the mind without any word being spoken of the good or bad direction of the life process at any moment within its respective boundary, conducive or not conducive to well-being and flourishing. And that's what's on this page. So I'll do this for all the nonfictions books that I read. You can see I reference Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance pretty heavily in The Way of Excellence, as well as Lila. So I've got those books on my desk that I wanted to show you. When it comes time to writing a book, I'll go to my bookshelf and I'll essentially look at all the books that I have. And I organize books by topic, so I have some organization already, but I'll pull all the books off that I think might inform the idea, might help support the arguments I'm making. And that becomes my mini library for individual book project. So in the case of The Way of Excellence, the mini library was about 45 books. And then when I have those books, the next thing that I'll do is I'll sit down before going through any of those books and I'll say, all right, as I work on the proposal, what I ultimately need to give to the publisher who I want to buy the book, the deep outline of the book, how am I going to structure this thing? What am I going to do? And for that, I'm very old school. I like to work with nothing more than a notebook and a pen. So you can see here, I've got notes that I was working on. In this instance, I went up to a smaller town called Brevard, which is about an hour away from Asheville. My wife had the kids in Washington, D.C. And I distinctly remember this page. It's from a couple years ago. But I had outlined really what I thought the entire book was going to be on one page of a notebook. And there are obviously, plenty of notes that led into it, and then plenty of notes that came after it. But at the time that I outlined the book, I thought it was going to be just 6 chapters. And as you'll see when you receive the book, it's many more than 6 chapters. I initially thought the book was going to have a few very long chapters, and it ended up with a couple long chapters and then many, many very short chapters. So it also shows the evolution. But this was the idea when I first had it. So from this outline that took me about a week, and I have all these books that are informing the outline, helping me think of ideas that I want to include that I'm going to put together in new ways. Then comes the book proposal. And the book proposal is essentially the fleshed out outline of a book for the publisher that I hope is going to buy the book. And in this case, they obviously did. It's the same publisher I've worked with for prior books. They've been incredible to work with. So as you can see, this had the 6 chapters, but it very quickly became 19 total chapters and 16 short chapters in the second part of the book. And you can even see, this is from a couple of years ago, I had this outline, this proposal that sold the book, but then I went back and I said, you know what? I think that I could have chapters on care, on focus, on consistency, on patience, on discipline, on gumption, and so on and so forth. So even though the proposal was sold as this, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking at some point shortly thereafter that actually maybe the structure could be different. And that, of course, led to a call with my publisher, and we agreed on the new structure. So as I mentioned, the proposal is a quick look. It has a table of contents. Then it has these chapter summaries that are each just about, 2 or 3 paragraphs per chapter. And then it also includes a sample chapter. So generally, the publisher wants to see a sample chapter to get a feel for the book. So like, here's the introduction of the book, at least the introduction of the book as it was when I first drafted it. It too has since changed since then. Chapter 1, the biology of excellence. You can see I got a very early start on it. And, even back then when I was first starting on it, I'm just constantly working and reworking by hand. So then I'm still going into this notebook. So this notebook was my notebook for all the pre-work before the draft. So you could see my first entry in this notebook was from April of 2022. Now we're in December of 2022. Now we're in October 19th of 2023. Now we're in January of 2024. And I am just continuing to flesh out this notebook until I really decide that I'm in a place where I've got the book exactly as I want it structured. And in the case of this book, that went all the way into early 2024. So at that point, I think I've got the structure for the book. It's tweaked since the proposal. I've got all these notes. The next step is then to go back to all the books that I pulled off the bookshelf and to go to each one of these little note cards, upside down, I guess they're not note cards, upside down sticky notes, and to then go to those pages and decide, is there something here that I think might make it into the book? And if there is, what I do is I write it on a note card. So here's a quote from Matthew Crawford. You can see on this note card, it shows that the quote is from Crawford, and the book is Shop Class of Soulcraft, page 15. So it's also very easy for me to reference and to cite. And then I've got the quote. And this quote, I figured this is a good quote that I might want to include in the way of excellence. Here's another example. Persig called quality the pre-intellectual cutting edge of reality. That's from a book called On Quality, page 29, and it's got some other notes. Now, this wasn't a direct quote, but I still like to cite the ideas. That's why my book had all these citations in them. So I put together all of these note cards, and there's probably 500 note cards on my first pass. And then I go through those note cards, and I start to sort them based on themes. So which of these note cards speak to the philosophy of excellence? Which of these note cards speak to the biology of excellence, the psychology of excellence, the importance of focus, of care, of goal setting, so on and so forth, consistency, community. And as I'm going through on that pass, I'm starting to realize that there's a fair amount of redundancy. And for that redundancy, I'm taking cards out of the pile. I'm saying, of all these quotes that get at the importance of competence for satisfaction, these are the 2 I want to use, so I don't really need these 4. So those 4, they go into a secondary bucket. And then I'm left with about 300, probably in this case, a little over 300 note cards that I think are going to form the skeleton of the book. and they're grouped by theme. The next step is to group them not just by theme, but by chapter. So now I've got all the note cards that I think I want to include, those quotes, those topics, those studies in the introduction of the book. And then I've got the same thing for chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, so on and so forth. And what I do is I put those note cards into a little file holder, and then I mark each chapter. So here's the intro, here's the philosophy chapter, here's the chapter on care, here's the chapter on routine, here's the chapter on community, so on and so forth. Every chapter in the book has a little subsection in here. What's fascinating, and back to the influence Robert Pirsig, who wrote Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and Lila, has had on my work. So this process is a one-for-one with Robert Pirsig in how he described his writing process in the book Lila. So I've got the cover art of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance tattooed on my arm. You can see the cover, my arm. It's just had such a profound impact on me, to my philosophy of life, the things I write about, and even down to the mechanics of how I write. This is Pirsig's system, and I've adopted it, and it's worked really well. So I've got the note cards. The way that I like to build my book is I start with what is the research and what does the philosophy say. So there's a lot of authors that will find a really good story and then try to build a whole philosophy around one or two really good stories. But for me, it's like, no, I think that actually the roots of a good book should be in what does the empirical research say and what does years of history and philosophy say. That's what I have in here. Then what I also realize is that part of what makes a good book is going out and getting great stories that exemplify the findings from the latest research and the truths that we know from philosophy and ancient wisdom. So as I'm going through my note cards, at this phase of the process, I'm asking myself, where could I use a really interesting story to bring this idea to life, to help readers really understand and feel what it would be like to apply a research finding or to apply a philosophical principle. And what I'm doing is I'm writing down the kinds of people that I want to interview to bring these ideas to life. And for this book, I had a list of 40 people that I reached out to. And of those 40 people, over 30 responded. And those are the 30 plus stories that you're going to read in the book. So now I've got this list of people, I've got those that are interested in talking to me, and then my reporting process starts. So for reporting, in some cases, I'm traveling to meet people to talk to them in person. In other cases, I'm talking over Zoom or over the phone. And as I'm taking reporting calls, I'm taking all kinds of notes, I'm recording conversations, and then the key parts of those conversations get transcribed on note cards, which also end up making it back into this filing cabinet of note cards. So now, at this point, it's been the better part of a year. I've got 300 plus note cards. I've got key ideas in quotes in studies on note cards. I've got key quotes and stories from my reporting on note cards. I am finally ready to write the book. So what does that look like? What that looks like is saying that today I'm going to start, and I write my books very linearly. So I start with the introduction. So I take out all the note cards from the intro of the book. There's a whole bunch of them. And I would lay them out on my desk. I'd clear off my desk. And I would make sure that I've got them in the right order. And I'm constantly tweaking as I go. And then these note cards, they essentially form the chassis of the introduction of the book. And I am just writing around these note cards. So it maybe takes from idea generation, which is late 2021, into the notebook 2022, to the time I actually start writing, which isn't until mid 2024, right? There's 2.5 years of work before I've written a single word. But what that allows me to do is when I actually sit down to write, this manuscript, which is about 65,000 words, I think it took me 9 weeks to write. So I am writing, what's 9 times 7, 63 days. I'm writing over 1,000 words a day on average. And I'm not writing 7 days a week. So most days I'm probably writing 1,300, 1,400 words. And the reason that I can do that is because I've done all of this prep work. And then I get to the computer and I can just be an artist, right? I'm not thinking about the studies. I'm not thinking about the report. Like all that's done. Now I just get to write the shit out of this book, which I find so gratifying. So then I write the first draft of the book and I print it out. I am clearly, as y'all can see, a very tactile person. I don't love to edit on a computer. If I'm doing like small revisions, I'll use track changes. But after the first draft, I print it. And you can see at the time, it was called The Way of Excellence. That stuck. But the former subtitle was Develop and Harness a Powerful Force for Greatness. And that obviously changed. So then I've got my draft manuscript. And I take it to Kinko's, right? This isn't as fancy as people think. I don't have like a black car, running it back from New York to me. This is me sending it to Kinko's at asheville.com, printing it out. And when I have it print, now I'm going page by page and I'm making my edits. And this is before my editor even sees the book, right? I'm going through it, and on most pages, there's notes. And the most common note is I'm cutting. Stephen King, another phenomenal author, says that you want to write a first draft and then you want to cut 30% of it. And if you think you can't cut 30% of it, then tell yourself you're going to have to cut 50 and you'll end up cutting 30. So I'm going through the manuscript and I'm editing and I'm editing. I make all the edits by hand first, and then I pull up the document again and I transfer what I did by hand into the document. And whereas a lot of people might say, hey, it's inefficient, why don't you just do this in Word? The answer for me is because the quality wouldn't be nearly that good if I just did it in Word. Now, one other thing is happening as I'm writing and editing, and that is now that I'm completely immersed in this idea, I'm finding more research that I didn't necessarily have at the beginning. And just because I've decided to write a book, yes, there's some, I guess, intellectual constraint, which says, all right, like I've kind of put the filter on information I'm taking in. But every once in a while, I'll come across a study that I'm like, it would be intellectually dishonest for me not to include this in the book. So in this case, I remember I was pretty far along. I was editing the draft manuscript, and this is an old study, right? It's from the spring of 1989. But someone sent this to me, not even knowing I'm writing the book, and said, I think you'd find this fascinating. It's a study of elite swimmers by an anthropologist, essentially, sports sociologist that embedded himself with a bunch of elite swimmers and lived with them. And it's called The Mundanity of Excellence, an ethnographic report on stratification in Olympic swimmers. I read the study and I thought to myself, there's a lot in here that would really support the book. And as much of a pain in the ass it is to go and make new note cards and add and rearrange, I want to write the best book possible. I have one shot at a book on this topic as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going through the study and I'm doing the same thing I do for books, right? I'm making notes in the margins. Here I say, for my own intro, meaning for the introduction to the way of excellence, talk about how I interviewed over 100 great performers for insights. I found the introduction to this study really catchy. And I said, hey, I could build my introduction in a similar way. And then from there, I get into the actual study itself and I'm highlighting. Here's a quote on community. I forgot if this quote actually made it into the final copy of my book, but if you look in the works cited, I can guarantee you this study is in there because I ended up using some of the material from it. And that, in a nutshell, is the process of how I write a book. So it starts with reading widely. It starts with underlining as I read. It starts with doing these sticky notes in the book. Then I go to the bookshelf. I say, I want to write a book on excellence. Let me take the physical neural connections in my brain. The closest thing I have to them is all the books and all the notes I've taken on the topic. I pull those books off the shelf. I take them with me in a suitcase, in this case to a cabin in Brevard. I outline the entire book. When I feel strong about the outline, I start my note card process. When I feel like I'm as close as I can get to truth with a capital T, based on the research and the history and the philosophy, then I start to say, who are the individuals that I want to test these ideas with, that I want to report on? I conduct all those interviews. That creates more quotes, more stories that I want to share in the book. Those become note cards. I've got all these note cards. I say, all right, now it's time to say no to speaking gigs, to turn down meetings, to really go in the writing hole. In this case, because I had done all this pre-work, the book emerged pretty quickly. The minute that first draft is done, it goes to Kinko's. I'm now away from screens. I'm away from the computer. I'm editing by hand. Those edits are done. It gets updated on the screen. And only then is the book going to my editor for the first time. Then she comes back to me with all sorts of edits. We're in a back and forth for anywhere between 6 to 9 months. And then eventually the book is done. It goes to production and it becomes the book. Welcome to part 2, where we're going to dive deep into the book itself. And that starts with the introduction, Redefining Excellence and Why We Need It More Than Ever. Early on in my research process, I ran a survey of over 100 individuals from all walks of life. I talked to athletes, artists, musicians, entrepreneurs, leaders, teachers, therapists, attorneys, physicians, on and on and on. And I asked these people a really simple question. First, I said, what are you doing when you feel best? Then I said, what does that best feeling feel like? If you can unpack it, what is it like? And here's what I got back. I feel best when I am immersed in what I'm doing. It makes me feel electric, alive, energized, content, satisfied, fulfilled. As if I really have some peace. I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. And then I asked that same group of people, how often do you feel this way? How often do you have these experiences? And without exception, the answer that I got was not nearly as often as I'd like. The reasons being distraction, rushing, restlessness, busyness, all synonyms for the common plague of modernity, which is just being pushed and pulled, being frantic and frenetic. So this survey really set up the core thesis of the book, which is we feel best and we do best when we're throwing ourselves into these meaningful endeavors, these pursuits that we care about. And what often gets in the way is the distraction of modern life. The second thing I want to call your attention to in the introduction of the book is the difference between excellence and pseudo-excellence. When I first started telling people about the idea for this book, they said, well, excellence isn't for me because I'm not an Olympian, or I'm not willing to win at all cost, or I don't want to wake up at 4:30 in the morning, or isn't excellence what all the optimization bros are doing, or this is perfectionism and I've worked so hard to get over my perfectionism. That's why the introduction is called Redefining Excellence, because as you'll see when you read the book, none of those things are actually excellence. At best, these are impostures to excellence, and at worst, they actually get in the way. So a couple things to pay attention to as you're reading in part one. It's that initial setup for the book, that survey research that then got translated to the opening of the book. And then now you see why I spend a fair amount of time contrasting real excellence with pseudo-excellence, and also going through all the common misconceptions about what excellence is and what excellence is not. Chapter 1, The Biology of Excellence. This chapter explores that feeling we get when we enter the zone, whether it's creating music, writing poetry or prose, performing your best during an athletic competition, drawing a picture, holding stage during a pivotal speech, or settling into a groove on a big project. When people are asked to describe what draws them to these projects, or what draws them to these objects and acts of other people, what stops them in their tracks, rarely, if ever, can they. Words do not suffice. Instead, they almost always report a visceral feeling of being moved. Herein lies the crux of chapter 1, The Biology of Excellence. It explores where this feeling comes from. And in order to do that, we go back to the beginning of time. Literally, the beginning of time. The chapter explores how single-cell bacteria, the first living organisms on Earth, how they made their way through life by relying on a capacity that biologists call sensing and responding. They would sense when the environment around them was conducive to life, and they would respond by moving toward it, or if it wasn't conducive, away from it. Long before there was consciousness, long before there was anything that we would register as subjective feeling, organisms in a single cell have this innate capacity. It is wired deep into life to move towards things that support their life force. And as you'll see in chapter 1, that innate capacity, that is still in our DNA. That describes that feeling that we get when we are firing on all cylinders. It describes that feeling that we get when we are beholding witness to excellence in someone else. What's also really fascinating about chapter 1, in an individual that I enjoyed speaking with at length for this book, is the violinist Hilary Hahn. She's a 2-time Grammy winner. She's one of the best violinists, if not the best violinist in the world. And what's fascinating about Hahn is she talks about how when she is on stage, or even when she is really in a groove practicing, it's not an intellectual act. She's not thinking about the note. She's not thinking about the rhythm. She's not thinking about the sound that she's trying to create. She's feeling her way forward. And what she told me is that that feeling, that is such a big part of what makes life worth living. And as you'll read in chapter 1, it's not just Hilary Hahn. I heard the same thing from teachers, from therapists, from coaches, from athletes, from artists. When we are in the slipstream of excellence, we are having this feeling and we're following this feeling. We're following it to our greatest performances. We're following it to our greatest life. And again, this feeling, we don't need words or thoughts to describe it. It's deep inside our DNA and it traces itself back to the beginning of time. The last thing to be on the lookout for as you read chapter 1 is a section on the 4 levels of competency. And I think this is really important because often you hear peak performers someone like Hillary Hahn say that it's just a feeling. You follow that feeling. What they don't necessarily explain is that you don't get there overnight. Oftentimes, almost every time when you're new to a pursuit, even something as simple as riding a bike for a kid, at first, you do have to think. You do have to deliberately focus on what you're doing. And as you get better, as you rise through these levels of competency, as you go from unconscious incompetence when you don't know that you don't know what you're doing, to conscious competence when you're effortlessly trying and getting it right, all the way up to unconscious competence, when you don't even have to think, you just feel your way forward. That is a process. And that process of skill development, it takes time. It's also one of the most fulfilling processes there are. So that is a little preview of what you'll see in chapter 1. Now, hopefully you know why I start at the beginning of time with bacteria. Hopefully you'll be on the lookout for those 4 levels of competency. I think there's something in there that everyone can apply to their life in this moment. And hopefully now you have a little bit of the backstory on my conversation with Hillary Hahn and the parts of that that made it into the book. Chapter 2, the psychology of excellence. A better alternative to obsessing over happiness is focusing on developing skills in worthwhile pursuits while opening your emotional aperture to a range of feelings along the way. When I am deep into a book project, at week 9 of a challenging 12-week training cycle in the gym, or engrossed in coaching my son's basketball team, I wouldn't say I'm happy. These endeavors require real work, yet there are few things I'd rather be doing and few feelings I'd rather have. These pursuits give my life texture. What I am is fulfilled. In chapter 2 of the book, we delve into the processes that underlie the feelings that drive excellence. And it starts by proposing a little bit of a hypothetical. Say that you are at an all-you-can-eat buffet where they are serving nothing but Skittles and ice cream and all of your favorite fried foods. Now, the feeling that you get in your body might be one that says, go, eat more, eat more. But if you chase that short-term feeling, you pretty quickly find it's in conflict with your long-term values and goals, which probably to feel good over the long haul and to be healthy. So that's the trap. If we just mindlessly follow our feelings, we can run into all of these discrepancies where what we feel in the short term conflicts with what we hope for in the long term. In this chapter on the psychology of excellence, it aims to give us skills to bridge that gap. A couple other things that this chapter does that I find really interesting. It takes this notion of flow head on and it separates excellence from flow. And there's 2 core distinctions that you're going to learn about. The first is that flow is values neutral. Yes, you can be in flow, falling in love, raising a child, doing groundbreaking research, taking over a baseball game from the pitcher's mound, making beautiful art. But you can also be in flow while scrolling social media. As a matter of fact, the researchers David Pizarro and Paul Bloom, they came up with the term shitty flow to describe these experiences of being in flow, but in a way that isn't really worthwhile or fulfilling. The second reason that flow is different from excellence is flow normally speaks to these acute bursts of being in the zone, whereas excellence is a longer groove in a rhythm that you find yourself in. But not every moment of that groove or rhythm is going to feel good. Oftentimes, we have to exert effort. We have to overcome stress. We have to take on things that in the moment feel challenging and uncomfortable that we might not even want to do. But all of that is part and parcel to riding the wave of excellence. And then a final thing to look out for in this chapter that I found fascinating is the importance of our environments and how we pursue excellence. The term for this that you'll read about in the book is disevolution, which essentially means that the way that we evolve doesn't always match our modern environments. Our modern environment today is set up for short-term gratification, for convenience, for cheap thrills. Pursuing excellence often requires that we move past that short-term mindset and that we aim for long-term fulfillment, again, by exerting ourselves in these meaningful projects. But if you live in a world, if you live in an ecosystem where everything around you, where the path of least resistance is to do the short-term thing, to chase that short-term high, to disregard those long-term values and goals, then it's going to be extremely hard to pursue excellence. Whereas if you can work to design your environment, both your internal environment inside of you as well as your external environment around you, to promote your own distinct path of excellence, as you'll read and as you'll see, you have a much better chance of getting and staying on that path. Chapter 3, the philosophy of excellence. What are we here to do? Each and every one of us asks ourselves this question. I've made the case that the answer is to strive for excellence, to figure out our values and goals and go after them with as much vigor and intimacy as we can. Another fitting answer is that we are here to love. But then again, what is excellence? What is caring deeply and paying attention in repeated practice and learning from failure and staying curious and steadfast dedication and getting really close and feeling deeply and showing up over and over again, if not love? And what is love if not a generative force that imbues our lives with quality? This chapter opens with my intellectual hero, Robert Pirsig, in his notion of quality, which he introduced in his 1974 cult classic, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Pirsig described quality as this felt sense of resonance and aliveness when an actor in their act, the separateness between them goes away. It's when you are so immersed in your activity that there's no longer you and there's no longer activity. Basketball is just happening. Conversation is just happening. Cooking is just happening. You lose yourself in what you're doing. And he called this quality. And he argued that quality drives the world forward. Now, Pirsig's not the first person, nor the last, that came to this realization. The book traces the philosophy of excellence back millennia, explores East and West, and all different schools of thought in between. And what it shows is that at the core of philosophical traditions is this notion of attaining our full potential and striving to fulfill our core function as key and core to a good life. From there, the book argues that excellence requires intimacy. Now, I want to pause here because this is worth pausing on. So many people hear the word intimacy and they think that it is something between romantic lovers. And while it definitely can be, intimacy can be about so much more. You can have intimacy with a craft, with a vocation, with a movement. Intimacy really means a lack of space, a lack of distance between you and something else. And excellence requires that we create that intimacy, that we commit ourselves to our craft, that we cultivate that intimacy. And on the other side of that intimacy lies our greatest creations and our greatest contributions. I could go on and on about this chapter because I love it. I love all the chapters in this book, but I'll mention one other thing that I think is really interesting. There's a subsection in this chapter about how satisfaction comes from competence. And not just any kind of competence, but from competence where there is a fairly objective arbiter of success. So a couple of examples. You sit down to write and there's nothing on the page. And then you finish writing and there's something on the page. You train to run a marathon, and at first you could hardly run a mile in under 14 minutes. By the end of your training, you can run a mile in less than 8 minutes. You start deadlifting, and 100 pounds feels heavy. You train for years and years and years, and then maybe you deadlift over 500 pounds. You're a comedian on stage, and you tell a joke. There's either laughter or there's no laughter. Right? These are all pursuits where the objectivity of success hits you right in the face. And even when you fail, this is valuable because we humans, we crave mastery. We crave this kind of tangible, concrete feedback that shows us when we are improving, and if we're failing to improve, what we need to do to get better. And in the book, I argue that all of us benefit from carving out parts of our work, parts of our personal life, where we can chase this kind of competence. And I talk about how you often see so many people that have all the riches you could imagine, that have all the status you can imagine, but what they don't have is hard-won skill. And these people tend to be miserable. Whereas you find, and I found, and you'll meet these people in the book, carpenters, small-town songwriters, artists, bakers, people that you've never heard of that have so much satisfaction and fulfillment in their life. Not because of money, not because of prestige, not because of status, but because they've developed skill and because they can exert that skill day in and day out. That's a huge part of excellence in this book. In the second part of the book, which we'll get into soon, we'll show you exactly how to cultivate that competency and skill yourself. It's easy to sit on the sidelines, to think about the thing, research the thing, talk about the thing, perhaps even dream about the thing. But these are all just ways of protecting yourself from actually doing the thing. Another trap is doing the thing, but not really doing the thing. It's the person who has the website and clothes and haircut and notebook and pen and typewriter and all the other accessories they think a writer ought to have. But what they don't have is the guts to put themselves out there and write. They fear failure and rejection, or that their work won't be read widely. Spending all this time on the act of being a writer is what someone does when they are scared of being a writer. Writing is an example I know well, but the pattern is universal. You see it in sport, cooking, music, photography, craft work, coaching, and on and on and on. You even see it in parenting. There is no shortage of elaborate ways to feign caring. Underneath each resides fear. Chapter 4, care. This chapter gets to the heart of a paradox that I think everybody struggles with, but not everybody has the vocabulary for. And what I'm trying to do in this chapter is really make it real by giving you words for it. And that paradox is simple. We often hold ourselves back from fully throwing ourselves into something because the pain that we anticipate we'll feel if things don't go our way. So the ultimate example of this is the deeper that you love someone, the harder it is to lose that person. And this is why the grief of loss is just one of the hardest things that most people experience. But the same theme applies to all kinds of other pursuits. You could throw yourself into trying to start a business. And the more deeply that you put yourself into it, the more deeply that you care, the harder it's going to be if it doesn't work out. The same is true for trying to make a basketball team, trying to run a fast marathon, trying to have your work published, trying to progress in an instrument. It doesn't matter what the thing is, right? We often stop ourselves from fully caring to shield ourselves from the pain of failure. Yet, what makes this so paradoxical is the way to have any chance at true success, at getting the best out of yourself, at being excellent, is to face that fear and to care deeply. The chapter opens with this line that says, you can have all the talent in the world, but it doesn't matter if you don't care. Underneath excellence resides care. This is true in all cases. So in order to be excellent, you have to care deeply. But in order to care deeply, you've got to face that fear and that vulnerability that often holds us back from giving it our all. There's a couple of ways to do this that are outlined in the chapter, but the one that I'll speak to that I think is really the most important for me personally, and perhaps you'll find this valuable too, is really just surrounding yourself with other people and other objects and artifacts, things like this book, music that you write, great documentaries, and then as I mentioned, other people that kind of get it, right? That are on a similar path to you, that are also caring deeply, that are facing those fears and that are making themselves vulnerable in their own pursuit of living an excellent and full life. And it doesn't make the pain of failure or loss or frustration go away, but it normalizes it. And it helps to put it in perspective. It helps to remind you that, yeah, caring deeply is hard. It's a courageous act. The word courage comes up in this chapter so many times. It is a courageous act to care deeply. And it is so important. And it is so key, not only to excellence, but to living a fulfilling and textured life. And the more that you can surround yourself with things that remind you of this, the more that it empowers you to care deeply, to give the things that you care about your best. Every Olympian I've talked to talks about this, right? They all say that it is so hard to just let go of that last 1% that's holding them back, because once they are all in, once they are caring that deeply, they know that even if they succeed, even if they win, at the end of the Olympics, they're going to have the post-win blues. And if they lose, they might even be more frustrated. But it's just the cost, it's the price of stepping in the arena, and it's one that we all have to pay on our path to excellence. Chapter 5, goals. Fulfillment doesn't come from wanting something out in front of us and then getting it. It comes from digging where our feet are and finding growth and meaning in the process. This is not inspirational fluff. I've spoken to hundreds of world-class performers, and when they reflect on their most memorable moments or stretches, they don't spend much time reminiscing about what happened at the peak. What they remember and relish most is what happened on the climb. One of my favorite parts about this chapter was the reporting that I did with the 3-time gold medalist, U.S. Winter Olympian, Callie Humphreys. Callie is a bobsledder, and her role on the team is really centered around pushing that thing out of the gates and building that momentum. She's just a force to reckon with on the ice, but she's also a force of a personality. And what I found the most interesting about talking to Callie is just how process focused she is. So in the book, there's this theme, in this chapter, there's this theme, process over outcomes, right? You can't control the outcomes. In her case, you can't control the humidity, the moisture on the ice. You can't control what the other athletes do. All you can control is your own process. And if you focus there, the results tend to take care of themselves. And Callie Humphreys uses that mindset in the event itself when she is going turn from turn, right? When she's out of the gate, how do I get my drive? How do I get my quads pushing into the ground to create that force? When I'm in the sled, how do I tuck as fast as possible? When I'm going into the first turn, how do I position my hips and shift my weight to pick up speed? She breaks what is just an 80-second run down into these micro 5 to 8 second stretches where she's so focused on the process. But then she takes that same mindset, and that's how she approaches a 4-year Olympic cycle. That's how she's approached her career. She's been one of the best in the world for 16 years. That is such a long time to do it. And when I asked her about that, she told me the bigger the goal, the smaller the steps. So each of those cycles of 4 years is broken down into 2 years. And each of those 2-year blocks has a purpose. Each of those 2 years is broken down into 1 year. Each year is broken down into quarters. Each quarter is broken down to months, to weeks, and it gets all the way down to this is what I have to do today. And we talked about this, and Callie told me that not only does this help because it takes what otherwise would be this enormously overwhelming goal, win an Olympic gold medal, it makes it feel very attainable day in and day out. It also helps because it centers her in doing the work itself. And what she told me is that as incredible as those gold medals are, and as sweet as the victories are, what she really looks back on and finds the most satisfying, where she found the most meaning in this pursuit, is in the individual days in the process of becoming a gold medalist. It's the relationships that she made. It's the other athletes that she trained with. It's the coaches that have worked with her. It's what she's learned about herself and what she's learned about her capacity to push limits. As you'll read in the book, Callie and her husband had an extensive IVF journey to give birth to their child. And Callie told me that more than anything that she's grateful from the sport of bobsled for, it's the things that it taught her about persistence and process mindset that she then applied to that area of her life. So I think that it is this beautiful summation in this one story about the importance of a process over outcome mindset, not only for your task, but also how that can teach you things that then you can apply to life as a whole. And this is a theme that comes up over and over again in the book itself, right? The things that you work on and the way in which you work on them also work on you. So yes, Callie is trying to become the best bobsledder she can be. And yes, you're going to hear all about her goals in that sport. But what is also happening is that the way that she approaches those goals, it's changing her as a person. And it's all the memories that she's making along the way and all the lessons that she's learning. That is just as much the value of excellence as her 3 gold medals. I hope that you like this chapter. It was one of my favorites in the book. Chapter 6, Trade-offs. You need to be a minimalist to be a maximalist. If you want to be really good, to master and thoroughly enjoy one thing, you need to say no to many others. At its core, this chapter is about keeping the main thing the main thing. And it's about doing that in 2 different domains. The first is life as a whole, and the second is within the big projects and pursuits that you're focused on. So let's start with life as a whole. We've got endless opportunities to throw ourselves into projects, into relationships, into communities. And this is great, right? The world is at our fingertips in a way that it hasn't been since the beginning of time. But the downside to this is it's easy to lose sight of what the most important things are, what the main things are. And by saying yes to everything, we sacrifice so much time and energy that could be spent pursuing excellence in a couple of core domains that actually matter to us most. So how do we evaluate those core domains? How do we figure out what those main things are? Really comes down to our core values. What are our goals? What are the things that we care about most? And how can we set up some constraints across the rest of our life to allow us to pursue those things fully? Right? You've got to be a minimalist to be a maximalist. Everything that you say yes to, you're saying no to something else. And if you're saying no to something in one of your core pursuits and one of your main things, that might not be a trade-off worth making. The second way that this chapter evaluates the importance of keeping the main things are within particular pursuits. So let's say that you're a chef, or you're an athlete, or you're a photographer, or you're a gardener, or you're leading a big organization. In all of these domains, we run into the same problem. There are all of these ancillary activities and external things that we could focus on that might help us in our pursuit, but there's limited time and energy. And if those things come at the expense of time and energy focused on the big rocks, on the main things, that also gets in our way. So many tools in this chapter, but I want to touch on just one, and this is the notion of a minimum effective dose. And essentially what this means is that once you've defined the core areas that you want to focus on, again, be it for life as a whole or for a specific pursuit, you just also want to identify things that maybe aren't core, but you don't want to leave completely behind. So for example, if I'm in a season of life where I'm really focused on writing a book, I don't want to completely leave behind my physical training. right? It might not be my area of focus, but it would be very bad for my mental health, for my physical health to totally disregard it. So I come up with a minimum effective dose for training. Let's say normally I train 60 minutes a day. That minimum effective dose might be 25 minutes a day. And for that season of life, I'm not focusing there, but I'm not totally leaving it behind. I'm saying if I can just put in 25 minutes a day, I stay just fit enough, I stay in touch with it enough, so it'll be there for me when I want to come back to it. And again, I'm using a really concrete example here to make this real for you, but this minimum effective dose can apply to anything. So much about making trade-offs is identifying for this season of life, what are the main things? Or in my pursuit, what are the main things? I'm going to focus there. I'm going to be laser focused there. And oftentimes there are these other parts of our life, parts of our pursuit that we don't want to leave behind. And for those things, how can we de-emphasize them without totally letting them go? How can we define a minimum effective dose for those things? And then some other things we are going to completely let go, and that's okay too. So you're going to read about this and so much more in this chapter on making trade-offs. I argue that part of being a mature adult is the ability to make trade-offs. And if you want to be excellent, you've got to get really good at keeping the main things, and making smart trade-offs in life and in your pursuits. Chapter 7, Focus. Algorithmic mass distraction. The experience of being served up an interruption engineered to capture your attention for a short period of time before being served up the next interruption engineered to capture your attention for a short period of time ad infinitum. Focus. Concentrated and enduring effort pointed toward a specific aim. There is an ongoing battle between algorithmic mass distraction and focus. Excellence requires winning it. This chapter gets really practical, and I'm going to mirror that here. In short, if you are constantly distracted, you're never going to achieve excellence in whatever you put your mind to. So much of excellence comes down to winning the battle. How do you win the battle? Well, there's this notion that we've got to train our internal focus. The most popular way to do this is mindfulness. I've written about it in my prior books. You hear about it all the time. And mindfulness is very beneficial, right? There's a reason I devote a few paragraphs to it in this book. You're training your internal muscle, your ability to have a thought, a feeling, an urge, a distraction around you, acknowledge that thought, feeling, or urge and distraction, and then come back to what's in front of you. For the longest time, I myself, and I still believe so many other people think that this is how you overcome distraction, right? You train that mindful muscle. Now, I think that's about 10% of the battle. And the reason for this shift of thinking is I visited a couple of monasteries in my life. And what's really interesting about those monasteries, none of them have a 5G internet connection, okay? Monks, they don't have smartphones in their pockets. So yes, they have incredible skill at meditation and they've trained that muscle, but they've also put themselves in an environment that is conducive to focus. And that's where this chapter centers. It says that, yeah, we want to strengthen our internal focus, but far more important is we want to create an environment around us that is conducive to focusing on our main pursuits. This environment is physical. It's literally the space around us. Where's our phone when we're working? How many tabs do we have open on our computer? What's going on with our browser? But it's also the people around us. Are the people around us serving as distracting? Are they constantly causing us stress? Are they taking away from our ability to give our all to the things that matter to us most? So yes, the internal stuff matters, but what I argue in this chapter is that the external stuff matters even more. And if you want to be the kind of person who can focus, you have to build an ecosystem around you conducive to focusing. And this requires going against the grain. The modern world is set up for algorithmic mass distraction. What this chapter teaches you how to do is really fight back, push back, and design your own environment that will allow you to focus and get the best out of yourself. Chapter 8, Consistency. The goal is not for any single outing to be extreme, but for the totality of effort over years to be extreme. Performative greatness is obsessed with heroic days. Actual greatness concerns itself with heroic decades. Excellence does not come from intensity. It comes from consistency. This chapter includes stories that are pretty far-ranging. You're going to hear about Warren Buffett and his investment strategy. You're going to hear about research out of cutting-edge sports science that shows that the way to avoid injury and make sustainable progress all the way up to world-class levels is not through heroic efforts. It's actually through showing restraint and through consistent efforts. And you're going to hear from chess superstar Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And I think I'll double-click on him right now because it's a really interesting part of this chapter. and I think it's a part of consistency that's often overlooked. We hear about consistency, we think about showing up day in and day out. And when things are going well, that's easy to do. And even when things are neutral, when things are going average, it's kind of tedious, but it's still easy to do. But a part of consistency is also showing up when things aren't going well. Doesn't mean that we don't make adjustments. Sometimes we do need to make adjustments, but you can't make those adjustments if you're not consistently showing up. And Maxime Bachir-Lagrave is the 7th highest ranked chess player of all time. And what he told me is that something that has really helped him get to that level is what he does when tournaments go haywire. And he made this point that when a tournament is going well or when it's going somewhat predictably, you kind of can go on autopilot. It's very easy to be consistent, to show up in those circumstances. But when he makes a blunder, which is chess term for an error, that is when it's so easy to spiral and to lose consistency, right? To throw your approach out the door, to go on tilts, to get a little bit reckless. And what he said has really helped his world ranking improve is over time, as he's matured as a chess player, he's focused on those moments. Those are the key moments to be consistent, not when things are going well, but when they're not. The concept in the book is raising the floor, right? We often think about raising the ceiling. Those are our heroic efforts, and that helps. But over the long haul, what actually helps more is when things don't go our way, when we're in a rough stretch, making that rough stretch a little bit less bad than it would have been a year ago. Or even making our reaction to that rough stretch a little bit less tumultuous as it would have been a year ago. So when we think about consistency, we need to think about not just what happens on our good days, but also what happens on our bad days and everything in between. Chapter 9, Discipline. When asked about his success, running superstar Eliud Kipchoge says, "Only the disciplined ones in life are free. When you are undisciplined, you are a slave to your moods and passions." The tennis player Venus Williams explains, "I honestly believe discipline is freedom." Kipchoge and Williams are alluding to what philosophers call positive freedom, or the freedom to express your potential. But in order for that to happen, you need to sacrifice what philosophers call negative freedom, or freedom from constraints. When you cultivate discipline, you are placing a constraint on whether or not to get started. You don't have to think about getting started. You don't have to feel a certain way to get started. You just get started. If consistency is about showing up, then discipline is the #1 skill that underlies consistency. It's easy to show up when you're motivated. It's hard to show up when you're not. As I mentioned in that quote earlier, philosophers refer to these two kinds of freedoms, negative freedom and positive freedom. And I think it's worth double-clicking here. Negative freedom says that you're free from constraints. I can go to bed whenever I want. I can eat whatever I want. I can spend my time however I want. Positive freedom says the opposite of negative freedom. It says, actually, I need constraints on my life so that I have freedom to be my best, freedom to become the best person that I can be, freedom to get the most out of myself on whatever I'm pursuing excellence in. And a lot of excellence is choosing positive freedom, freedom to be your best, over negative freedom, freedom from constraints. You've got to put constraints on ourselves. And there are physical constraints, such as this is when I'm going to go to bed, or I'm not going to have ice cream in the house, or whatever it might be. And those are all important. But I think the most important constraint is actually a psychological one. And that psychological constraint is I don't get to choose whether or not I get started. I just get started. I just show up and give myself a chance. And if I still feel off 5 to 10 minutes into whatever I'm doing, I can always shut it down. If I feel like I'm going to get injured or if I'm sick, I can shut it down. But I give myself a chance more days than not. And this ties into another concept that comes up in this chapter, which is the notion of not prejudging your performance. And by this, what I mean is that you could wake up and you could feel really off. Or if you're an athlete or a musician, you could be going through the warm-up and you could feel like crap. If you're a chef, you could be doing food prep and just everything is frustrating you. To be honest, when I was recording this video with Nate, who's the creative director on it, for the first 4 hours, we got absolutely nowhere. The technology was breaking. We became hungry. We became a little bit tired. We were frustrated. It would have been really easy to just throw in the towel and say, today's not the day, let's start tomorrow. But we didn't allow ourselves to do it. We said, we just have to show up and get started. And what ended up happening after that is we recorded for 4 hours, essentially nonstop, a lot of great stuff. And this comes up time and time again, that just because the warm-up goes bad or just because the morning is off, it's so easy to prejudge the performance and say, today's just not my day. but you don't know unless you show up and give yourself a chance. In the chapter, I tell two stories. One might not be so relatable. It's the story of the Beatles and how much of their great music, and you're going to find out about this in the book, some of their most iconic songs were recorded on days that they didn't want to be there. They were all feeling like crap. In many cases, they were completely hungover. But instead of just saying, we're going to kick it down the road and record tomorrow, they came to the studio, they got started, and you'll find out about the rest. It's truly history. But there's a more relatable story in this chapter too. It's the story of someone named Zach, who's a really good cyclist. He had trained for a long time to set a PR on a particular climb. And he woke up that morning and he was feeling off. If he would have worn a Whoop or an Oura Ring or one of these trackers, his readiness score would have been very low. But he didn't prejudge the performance based on how he felt. He said, I'm not feeling great right now, but I don't know how I'm going to feel once I get going, so let's start this race. And he ended up having the best time trial of his life. It's true in cycling, but it's true far beyond cycling. Discipline means not prejudging how you're feeling. It means showing up and giving yourself a chance. It also means having the discipline to shut things down. If you do get started and you feel yourself sick, or you feel yourself going to get injured, or you feel yourself so burnt out, then discipline is the opposite. It's stop it, right? Discipline is doing what you need to do. It's not hemming and hawing. It's not chest thumping acts of bravado. It's making the right decision in the moment to support your path to excellence. That's what you're going to learn all about in this chapter. Chapter 10, Renewal. Rest and renewal don't come at the expense of progress. Rest and renewal are an integral part of progress. Ernest Hemingway often spoke about the hardest part of the writing process for him being stepping away and taking a break. And I know that really well as a writer, and my guess is you know that in various pursuits in your own life. When I was writing this book, there were times when there was a problem on the page that I was trying to solve, and every cell of my body urged me to just keep leaning in, to keep pushing forward. It was physically painful to step away and go for a walk, or go to the gym, or even take a shower, even eat. We can get fixated on something and we just want to push, push, push. But what happens is eventually we hit a wall. And if when we hit that wall, we continue to lean in, not only do we not make progress, but we get in our own way. This happens acutely, right? Hour by hour throughout the day. This happens over the course of a week. This happens over the course of a career. This happens over the course of a lifetime. There are going to be times, again, both micro and macro, when our progress depends on our ability to step away, to rest and renew. So you'll read about in this chapter, stress plus rest equals growth. I've written about this extensively in my other work. It's worth mentioning again here because it is so true and it is so important. What this chapter does that my prior work doesn't do is it goes into the various evidence-based ways to rest and renew on those different levels of time. You're going to hear some pretty remarkable stories. You'll hear from Lin-Manuel Miranda, the greatest playwright of this generation, on how his best ideas occurred to him, not when he was working, but when he was on vacation. You're going to hear from gold medal decathlete Damian Warner about the forced breaks that he takes at the end of every big Olympic cycle, and how at first those forced breaks were terrifying because he felt that if he lost his fitness, he might never get it back. But now, as he's progressed on his path to excellence, he realizes that those forced breaks are crucial to his progress. So in this chapter, you're going to get essentially a really strong argument that will go directly to that part of your brain that doesn't want to step away, that doesn't want to rest, that feels like you're going to fall behind if you do, followed by an evidence-based menu of ways to rest throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the year, and over even greater periods of time. But more than anything, it's this mindset shift. Even if all you care about is doing great work, if you want to be like a robot, and I don't suggest you live like that, the book doesn't suggest you live like that, but let's take that as a hypothetical. Even if you want to live like a robot and do the best work, you still ought to rest, because there is no great work without periods of rest and renewal. Chapter 11, confidence. Arrogant people are loud. They need to convince everyone, including themselves, that they are up for the task. The reason being they aren't sure if they actually are. Underneath arrogance, you'll almost always find insecurity. Confident people are quiet. They know they've got what it takes. There is no need to waste anyone's time or energy, including their own, hemming and hawing. Underneath confidence, you'll almost always find evidence. No amount of outward bravado compensates for a lack of inner evidence. Even approaches like self-talk only work if you have reason to believe what you are saying. there's only one way to gain genuine confidence: by doing the work to earn it. A little bit over 6 years ago now, I was working on a piece for a magazine called Lion's Roar, and it's a wisdom publication. And I didn't really necessarily think deep down inside that I had any kind of special wisdom to offer. By this point in my writing career, I'd been published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. So I'd had the fortune and good luck to be in some pretty big publications, but I'd never written for something that I would consider a wisdom publication. The piece was on this topic called right striving, which essentially is, how do you be ambitious without being an asshole? And in the process of writing that piece, I did a lot of quoting other thinkers. I quoted Tara Brach, I quoted Joseph Goldstein, I quoted Jack Kornfield, all these wisdom thinkers. And I remember that I put together a draft that I thought was outstanding, and I sent it to the editor. It's the first time I've worked with her. And she wrote back to me, "This is a great piece, but I don't want to hear what Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach and Joseph Goldstein think. I want to hear what you think. Own your seat." And those words have stuck with me ever since, the own your seat part. What she was saying is that I had done the work, I had put in the reps, I had done the writing and the research and the thinking on this particular topic where I didn't have to lean on all those other people. I could own my seat. I could be confident because I had the evidence that I could offer something even for a quote unquote wisdom magazine. It also helped me realize that the people who have these sorts of doubts and insecurities like I had, it actually can be a good thing. What this editor helped me to realize is that having that doubt, having that insecurity, having that intellectual humility isn't separate from confidence. It's actually a part of confidence. And if you've done the work, if you've put in the reps, if you have the evidence, you can take those doubts and insecurities along for the ride, and you can own your seat no less. In this chapter, you'll not only hear more about that story, but you'll also hear how this plays out with surgeons. I love talking to surgeons because they are high performers with really high stakes, right? Me or you, someone's body is on their table and they're operating on this person, sometimes in life-altering situations. And surgeons, they also carry this kind of doubt and insecurity. They don't tell you that because as a patient, you don't want to hear that. But a good surgeon has some humility. They have to have humility. It's a part of their confidence. But what they can rely on is their years of training and all the reps that they've done to put themselves in that position. So confidence isn't about this massive belief in oneself. It's not delusional thinking. It's not self-esteem. Confidence is looking back on a body of evidence that you've given yourself that shows you that I belong. And it's acknowledging that if you trust your training, if you look on your body of evidence, you can still step into the arena and do a great job. Chapter 12, patience. Patience is one of the greatest competitive advantages there is. It neutralizes our inclination to hurry and overemphasize acute results, and it lends itself to strength, stability, and lasting progress. I've yet to meet someone who has achieved excellence and who describes their process as rushed. This chapter opens with some fascinating research that shows that the average attention span these days is 47 seconds. And it also profiles a study that was conducted out of the University of Virginia, where participants were given two choices. They could either sit in silence with nothing to distract them for 15 minutes, or they could choose to shock themselves with electrical currents. And the majority of men and 25% of women, so a sizable proportion of women too, chose to shock themselves. So they'd rather inflict pain on themselves than do nothing. And we're talking just waiting for 15 minutes. Now, this is no fault of our own. So much of what is around us in the world is constant stimulation and novelty and speed. We always read about overnight breakthroughs. Nothing is ever done fast enough. You've got to move fast and break things. But the truth is often the exact opposite. There is no such thing as an overnight breakthrough. Every overnight breakthrough rests on months, years, and in some cases, decades of prior work. And if you're always trying to move fast and break things, you often end up broken. Now, this chapter goes from laying out this tension between a world that is addicted to speed and the need to be patient for excellence, and it goes into various strategies to help us stay patient A couple strategies that I want to touch on here that I think are really important. The first is little victories. This acknowledges that playing the long game is really hard. I know this really well in the book writing process. As you learned earlier in the video in part 1, writing a book is a multi-year endeavor. And even from the time the book is done, the manuscript is done, to the time it's published, that can often take over a year. So there's a lot of patience, there's a lot of waiting, and we're built to want rewards. So to the extent that's possible, if you can give yourself these milestones and little victories along the way to a longer goal, you scratch that itch for the reward while still staying patient in pursuit of the bigger goal that's down the road. So what do those little victories look like? They look like the outline of the book, the proposal of the book, a chapter of the book, the first draft of the book, the copy edits of a book, the cover art for a book, the copy on the jacket for a book, and on and on and on. So this big goal, publish a book, then gets broken down into all these little victories that you can achieve along the way that reinforce the path and keep you coming back. So it's this bifurcated concept of, yes, you need to stay patient in the pursuit of big goals, and excellence is this never-ending journey that of course requires patience, with understanding that human nature is such that it wants rewards, and if we can give ourselves rewards, little victories in pursuit of bigger goals, it helps to keep us on the path. And the other concept in this chapter that I find to be really helpful is this notion of increasing your surface area of luck. Essentially, it means this. Anyone who says that there's no luck involved in success is full of it. Every successful person has had their fair share of lucky breaks. However, anyone that says that success is just about luck and doesn't require hard work is also full of it, right? It's not this or that, it's this and that. Success requires a lot of hard work and it requires luck. You can't control when you're going to get lucky, but you can control the effort that you put in. This concept of increasing your surface area for luck means staying patient so that you give yourself more time to get lucky in science, in sport, in business, in so many other areas that you'll learn about in this book. It's people that stayed patient, that continue to work hard over a long period of time, that increase their surface area of luck. Those are the people that luck tends to find. And when they get lucky, they have their biggest success. Chapter 13, routine. We cannot develop optimal routines by mimicking what other people do. While it's true that certain behaviors are close to universally effective, such as exercise, social connection, and sleep, even then, there is no optimal time, place, or way to engage in each. It is only through astute self-awareness and experimentation that we come to discover what works best for us. The most important takeaways from the chapter on routine for me are twofold. The first is that routines are extremely important. Every single high performer that I interviewed, every subject in a research study that I looked at that achieved their best, regardless of what field they're in, had some sort of routine that they relied on. The second concept that is equally important is your routine has to be flexible enough that when things aren't going exactly as you plan for, you don't become fragile and you don't freak out. So the first rule of routines is have a routine, develop a routine. The second rule of routines is be willing and able to release from it. Now, there are some universal components of routines that I spoke to at the opening of this section. But what's not universal is the when, the timing behind these things. All of us have different unique biological chronotypes, which describes the natural flow of energy that we experience over the course of a day. And we also have unique lives with unique constraints and obligations. So what I argue in this chapter, and what I believe to be true, what I know is true, is that there is no one-size-fits-all routine. There's a gazillion-dollar economy on the perfect routine. Jump into a cold bath, stare at the sun, put nose tape on, wake up at this time, no, wake up at that time, drink this tea, drink coffee, don't drink coffee, and on and on and on. Some of these are completely pointless, but many of these can be beneficial. They're tools in a toolkit. But you need to figure out the right application of the tools for you, given your unique biology and your circumstances. And that's what this chapter will walk you through. Chapter 14, Gumption. Gumption is a forward inertia, a sense of progress and possibility, a strong yet measured enthusiasm. As you'll see in the coming pages, with the right mindsets and actions, nearly anyone can develop it. When you have gumption, you perceive obstacles as challenges rather than threats. You problem solve and bring your creativity to bear. Gumption doesn't come to the fore in the absence of obstacles. Rather, it is a feeling that no obstacle can stop you. I love the word gumption. And if I'm being honest, a big part of the reason that I included it is because I love the word so much. It's a word that sounds exactly like what it means. Gumption. Robert Pirsig, writing about this word in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, described it as kind of homely, as kind of this ugly, gritty term. And that's exactly what gumption is. It says that regardless of what is happening around me, I'm going to maintain an enthusiasm and I'm going to maintain an inertia toward the goal at which I am pointed. Now, this entire chapter focuses on how we build gumption. Gumption is like a tank, and we want that tank to be near full. And there's all kinds of gumption traps, things that drain gumption from our lives and from our pursuits. We want to be on the lookout for those gumption traps. And at the same time, there are all kinds of things that fill us with gumption, that give us that sense of forward momentum and inertia and energy. And we want to be on the lookout for those things too, so that we can incorporate them into our individual practices and into our lives. You're going to learn about the importance of seeing the ball go through the net. This is a metaphor, and it's one of my favorites. When an athlete is struggling on the basketball court, age-old advice is for that athlete to get to the free throw line. And the reason for this is because for most basketball players, a free throw is a high percentage shot. So you get to the free throw line, there's a good chance you're going to see the ball go through the net. And once you see the ball go through the net, even if it's something as simple as a free throw, you get a little bit of that inertia back, a little bit of that momentum. Your subconscious says, I can do this. Then you start making better plays on the court. You start hitting longer shots. You start turning the ball over less. Every pursuit has an equivalent of seeing the ball go through the net. That's just one of many tools that you're going to learn about in this chapter to renew gumption when you start losing it and to maintain it when you have it. Chapter 15, curiosity. Whether you play basketball or cello, repair cars or build tables, write books or coach young people, your craft can be a vessel for self-discovery. Curiosity is intimately linked to growth. There's a curiosity to figure out what you are capable of, a curiosity to better know your craft, and a curiosity to better know yourself. The idea for this factor of excellence in this chapter came into being when one of my close friends was visiting here in Asheville. His name is Stu McMillan. He is a sprint and power athlete coach. He's coached over 35 medalists in the Olympics and hundreds of world champions. Many people would say he's the best living sprint coach right now. And we were at my favorite restaurant in town, a spot called Tall John's, and I was telling him about this book and so fortunate to have his ear and essentially testing all the factors of excellence. And he said, you know what I think you're missing? I said, what's that, Stu? And he said, I think you're missing the importance of thinking like a scientist. And I said, tell me more. And he said that when he's coaching an athlete, especially as he's gotten later in his career and more advanced, he's constantly imagining that he's in a lab and he's got all of these different variables that he can test. And he's got to methodically test the variables, ideally in isolation, to figure out what's going to move the needle. What's going to make someone 1/100th of a second faster, or what's going to make someone throw just a little bit further or jump just a little bit longer. And what Stu said is it's not so much that he's a great scientist, that he can test those variables in isolation with the same rigor that a PhD in a laboratory can, but it's the mindset underneath it. It's this endless curiosity. And he's been coaching at an elite level for decades. We got to talking and he said, maybe it's not think like a scientist. Maybe it's broader than that. Curiosity has this intrinsic reward. Obviously, you want the athlete to get faster, but that athlete's either going to get faster or not. And then what keeps you coming back the next time and the next time and the next time? And what I realized with Stu is for him, for me, for all of us pursuing our own unique paths of excellence, what keeps us coming back at the end of the day at root is ultimately this curiosity to see if we can get more out of ourselves, to see if we can get better, to see if we can push our limits, to get to know our craft better and to get to know ourselves better. And that's why curiosity is fuel for the path of excellence. It's a great renewable source of energy. Chapter 16, failure. Failure sucks. It is also inevitable. Keep going. As you'll see in the book, this chapter is only one page, and I was tempted to make it only 3 sentences. And the reason for the brevity here is that there's so much out there on failing forward and failing productively and learning and growing from failure. And all of these things can be true. But I also think that they have a way of sugarcoating just how much failure sucks and just how inevitable it is. This chapter is directly in conversation with chapter 4. And if you remember earlier, we talked about how the things that we care about, they break our hearts because at some point we're going to fail. And what I wanted to do in this chapter, this very short, brief chapter, is just nod to that, acknowledge the pain and the hurt and the disappointment of failure. But also in the single page that you'll read in the book, you'll see that the love of the craft, the love of the path, the love of the pursuit of excellence is strong enough to hold the hurt of failure. Failure sucks. It's inevitable. Keep going. It's as simple and as hard as that. Chapter 17, Community. A paradox of human nature is wanting to be unique and independent on the one hand, while also wanting to belong and be enmeshed in something larger on the other. One way to resolve this paradox is by striving for our own version of greatness in a community of others. The word compete comes from the Latin roots co, which means together, and petriere, which means to seek, rise up, or strive. In its most genuine form, even competition is about rising up together. Decades of research show that there is no such thing as quote-unquote self-improvement. The people that we put ourselves around, they shape us. All excellence happens in connection with other people. There really is no such thing as the lone wolf. It is a misnomer. One of the most intriguing and my favorite stories of this chapter comes from the Detroit Lions NFL football team. It had been over 30 years since they'd won a playoff game, one of the most notable slumps in the history of all major sports. And they finally broke that streak. And in the locker room after this game, there was all sorts of commotion. And the coaches and the general manager of the team broke the celebration, the hugging, the champagne, and they brought it in for a quick speech. And in that speech, 3 people talked: the coach, the general manager of the team, and the quarterback. And you know what word came up more than any other word in that short little speech? The word love. These are big, burly dudes that just spent 60 minutes of game time on the field, essentially trying to destroy the other team. And here they are, after this historic victory, talking about love. How much they love each other, how they did this because they love each other. The word was said over 5 times in under 2 minutes. And to me, that exemplifies so much of the power of community on the path to excellence. It also tracks to research that's included in this chapter that shows that on their deathbeds, at the very end of life, when people are asked to reflect on what they remember most, they don't reflect on the achievement. They don't say, I won that playoff game, or I won the gold medal, or I published the book, or the album won a Grammy, or I opened the restaurant, or my business IPO'd. What they reflect on are the people that they did it with, the relationships that they forged along the way. So much of the reward of excellence is the journey, and such a big part of the journey is the community of people that you go on it with. Chapter 18, Joy. The best performers in the world are focused, determined, a little bit crazy, at times obsessive, and live mundane lifestyles that most people would find boring. That is all true. But the best performers in the world also experience deep joy in their crafts. What makes for greatness, and not just in sport, but in anything, is being intense and joyful. It's the joy that makes the ferocious dedication, drive, and intensity sustainable. This chapter takes head on the notion that in order to be elite at what you do, you just have to bury yourself. It argues that what allows you to bury yourself, what allows you to have that intensity, what allows you to sustain that intensity over time is experiencing joy along the way. Because if you're not having fun with what you're doing, odds are you're not going to do it for very long. Even some of the most intense performers ever, think Michael Jordan. As intense as he was, as much as he wanted to win, that man loved playing the game and he had fun playing the game. He had fun competing. Something that comes up in personal development and self-help world that really frustrates me, that's relatively new over the last 5 years, is this mindset that it shouldn't be fun. You should suffer, right? You should always be grinding. You should be angry. You should have a chip on your shoulder. You should prove everybody wrong. Well, that shit plays well on Instagram and YouTube. When I went out and talked to all of these elite performers in different fields, nobody told me that that was their mindset. That is great as a mindset if you want to make content for the internet, but if you actually want to get better at what you're doing, you need to experience joy along the way. This chapter tells the story of Courtney Dauwalter among many other stories, but I'll pause for a moment on Courtney here. She's the greatest ultramarathon runner to ever live. She is as intense as anyone. You watch videos of her running in mile 77 of a 100-mile race at extreme altitude, and she is locked in. But you know what Dauwalter says? You know what keeps her going in those moments? It's joy, particularly when she hits a dark patch. She reminds herself that she is choosing to do this. And yes, she's going to be intense. And yes, she is going to suffer. Ultra running is the definition of voluntary suffering, but joy has got to be in the driver's seat. That's what Dauwalter told me, and this chapter argues that joy ought to be driving the bus for all of us. Now, not every moment of the path is going to be fun. Not every moment is going to be joyful. That's a false expectation. That's impossible. But the totality of the journey, it's got to include moments of joy. And in today's world of tumult, of rush, of busyness, so often the first thing that goes is the ability to stop and savor those moments of joy. When I talk to people who recently retired from their craft, one of the largest regrets that people have is that they didn't spend enough time enjoying the good moments. This chapter acknowledges that trap and provides a whole manner of tools to help you find joy and savor it in your pursuit of greatness. Chapter 19, Completion. This is the last chapter of the book. It's completion of the book, and it speaks to the importance of having milestones along the way on our path to excellence. As I've said before in this video, as you'll read in the book multiple times, excellence is a path that knows no end. The goal is the path, and the path is the goal. However, it's so important to have concrete milestones along the way. These milestones, they imbue the path with meaning. If we never stop and pause to realize what we achieved in the person that we're becoming along the way, the path loses meaning. In the words of the philosopher Byung-Chul Han, it loses gravity. Milestones, they provide gravity, both literally and figuratively. Literally, they hold us to the path. They keep us coming back. And figuratively, they imbue the path with gravity. They imbue it with meaning. I want to read the last part of this chapter, which is the last part of the book. In the myth of Sisyphus, the gods condemn the protagonist to push a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll down each and every time for all of eternity. There are countless interpretations of the story. The one I've come to adopt is that we are all Sisyphus. We are all pushing a boulder up a hill, only to have it fall down again and again and again. Excellence is about finding fulfillment in the struggle. It's about exerting ourselves with a smile on our face more often than a frown. It's about expressing our unique talents and gifts and creating joy, community, and meaning in the process. Each time we reach the top of a mountain, it's important to pause and take stock of that particular ascent, knowing all the while that what comes next is yet another climb. By marking milestones and moments of completion, the broader journey, the one that never ends, becomes that much more satisfying.